Okay, so next up, we're going to introduce the other three trig ratios. We call them the reciprocal functions because what they are is they're reciprocals of the sine, cosine, and tangent functions. So just a quick reminder, the diagram you're looking at right here is a circle. It's not necessarily the unit circle, so we want to keep in mind that when we're talking about sine and cosine of an angle in a circle right now, not necessarily the unit circle, should be understood as, the cosine of an angle should be understood as the adjacent side right here divided by the radius right there, which is what this statement is saying, just as a quick review. The sine of an angle would be the opposite side length right there, the y-coordinate divided by the radius right there. And then also what we just learned is that the tangent of an angle is equivalent to the opposite over the adjacent side right there, y over x. So cotangent of an angle, abbreviated COT of the angle, cotangent of the angle, is the reciprocal function of the tangent function. Okay, you got to be careful here. So reciprocal, I know many of you guys just kind of like flip a fraction, but if you don't have a fraction, then we can turn around and say that the cotangent of an angle is 1 divided by the tangent of that angle there, right? Or if you're working with just the coordinates, you can turn around and say that the cotangent of an angle is equal to the x divided by the y coordinate there. Keep in mind that because this is a fraction, that the y coordinate cannot be 0. So what that means is there are certain values or angles that when you rotate around the unit circle, if the y coordinate is 0, then the cotangent function doesn't really exist. And they would be angles at 0 degrees or 0 radians, 180 degrees or pi radians, and then 360 degrees or 2 pi radians. Basically, any angle that terminates on the x-axis anywhere is going to be undefined for the cotangent because the y-coordinate of that point is 0. The next one is the secant function, the secant of theta, which is the reciprocal of the cosine. And again, it's the same concept. It's abbreviated SEC of the angle, and it's going to be 1 divided by the cosine of the angle. Again, what you want to keep in mind is you're dividing the number 1, right, by the cosine of the angle. So it's 1, divide button, and then cosine of the angle, and then you would hit enter. If you're looking at it in terms of just the coordinates, that would be the radius length or the hypotenuse length right here, divided by the x coordinate. And just like in the cotangent function, because you have a variable right here in the denominator, we cannot divide by 0. X cannot be 0. So any angle that terminates in the circle where the x coordinate is 0, we're going to have an undefined value for the cotangent, for the secant function. And those would be the pi over 2 radians or 90 degrees, and also 3 pi over 2 or 270 degrees. So any angle that terminates on the y-axis will have an undefined value for the cosine function. And lastly is the cosecant of an angle. That's the reciprocal of the sine function. It's abbreviated CSC of theta there. Same thing, it's the reciprocal, so it's 1 divided by the sine of the angle. Again, you're dividing 1 by the sine of the angle, so make sure, if you have to group your trig function to do it correctly, then make sure you group it. But in general, you take the sine of the angle, and then you divide 1 by that, or in your calculator, you just hit 1, divide, and then sine of the angle. Also, if you're speaking in terms of the coordinate values, again, cosecant is the reciprocal of the sine. Sine is y over r. So in this case, it's going to be r divided by y, or the hypotenuse length divided by y. Again, we have a variable in the denominator. If the y value is ever equal to 0, then we have an undefined value. So again, any angle that terminates in the circle where the y-coordinate is 0, that would be, again, 0 degrees or 0 radians, or 180 degrees, or pi radians, or and a full rotation again would take you back to 360 degrees or 2 pi radians. In other words, any angle that terminates on the x-axis will have an undefined value for the cosecant function, and that's because you end up with a variable there in the denominator, and y cannot equal 0, which would also mean that the sine of theta here could not equal 0 for this function. Another thing to kind of keep in mind here is that when you're dealing with this reciprocal idea, I kind of feel like I've already said it, but I just want to point it out. We'll just focus on tangent right now. It's 1 divided by the tangent of the angle. It is not, right? So the cotangent of an angle does not equal the tangent of 1 over the angle. So often students get a little confused there. That is not the case. The cotangent is 1 divided by the tangent function there. The other thing I wanted to point out quickly is students try to find ways to kind of connect, the abbreviated name for the secant function with the reciprocal idea here. The one thing I want to point out is that, these letters aren't consistent, right? So secant starts with an S, cosine starts with a C, cosecant starts with a C, sine starts with an S. So if you're trying to remember which reciprocal function is connected to which standard function, the first letter of each function there doesn't line up there. Cotangent's nice because it has the word tangent in it, but secant and cosine are related, and sine and cosecant are related there. So just be careful when you're working through those problems.